Hi, everyone. Welcome back from the break. We will now begin our first panel of the day, our afternoon session, which I'm greatly looking forward to. Representation, accountability, and solidarity in institutions and the artists they serve. And I would like to introduce Stephanye Watts, Program Manager from Recess, who's a member of Rethinking Residencies, who will briefly introduce the speakers and moderate the panel. Thank you.
Again, I'm Stephanye Watts. I'm the program manager at Recess Art, located in Brooklyn, New York, and super excited to be here with these esteemed panelists that are coming from all over the world today. So first, we have Carmen Lane, the founder and director of Intrinsic Center for Healing and Creative Leadership. We then have Francesca Masoero, the assistant director and curator of Le 18. I get to practice my French today. Next, we have Emily Jacir, artist and co-founder and founding director of Dar Jacir for Art and Research. We will be using Emily J because we have two Emilys in the crew today. So if you hear me say Emily J, that's who I'm referring to. And next we have Emily Pethick, aka Emily P for today, the director for Rights Academy. And next we're going to move on to presentations. Immediately following the presentations, we'll be having a conversation amongst ourselves. We'll then open the floor to Q&A and then we will wrap up. So I'm now going to throw the mic to Le 18.
Well, hi everyone. Francesca here. Thanks to Rethinking Residency for inviting me this week to this conversation. In preparation for this presentation, I went actually back to the etymology of residency, residere in Latin, encapsulating the idea of remaining at a place, settling, but also resting. Operating in territories with deep colonial legacies and new colonial dynamics, and in a field statutorily characterized by hypermobility and de facto great precariousness, I believe we can refrain from asking questions such as who gets the chance to reside somewhere, how and with which ethics, how as cultural entities do we settle, ground or rest, and how do we allow others to do so? How do we tackle systemic holes and our territory structures? Sketching how we have engaged in the politics and poetics of location, and also of mobility and immobility and of time, whether productive or otherwise, may be a good way to introduce you Le 18. So let me first bring you to Marrakesh to give you a sense of the fragmentations traversing the territory we locate in. Well, a well-known tourist destination, Marrakesh is often apprehended as the quintessence of the Orient, primarily consequence, and can you change the slide, please? Thank you. So primarily consequence, as Zineb Benjeloun playfully shows us here, to the quasi-soul representation of the city as encapsulated by its fantasized Medina. The Medina, though, is not the somewhat pre-modern landscape sold to tourists. It is where relatively poor dwellers struggle to live due to a political, economic, extractive, and gentrifying monoculture, and where the cultural heart of a millennial civilization is still embedded, though today disappearing for a lack of political interest in sustaining its survival. Tripled in size in the last 20 years, Marrakesh extends quite beyond the Medina. Its modern central districts are surrounded by more degraded ones, neighbored by 18 dazzling luxury golf resorts, which is actually an unbearable number for a city in a semi-desert region. The Palm Grove, which was once the green lung of the city and the main communal space for its inhabitants, is today half dried out and half transformed in a gated residential area. From the colonial times onwards, the enclosure of urban commons combined with socioeconomic uneven stratifications, spatial quasi-segregations, and the ongoing erasure of collective memory and popular transmission practices have produced a visible lack of spaces to assemble and socialize. So as a multidisciplinary cultural space purposely established in the Medina, Les 18 has tried to create an open space and shared one, invested in learning from, thinking about, and engaging in the specific locality in which it grounds. Hosted in a traditional house, Les 18 has been able to maintain the intimacy and informality of a home, becoming a communal point, gathering and partly creating an expanding community. You can go next to the next couple of slides, thanks. This has been facilitated by year-long programs spanning from visual arts to performance, from literature to cinema, with a key transdisciplinary vocation, connecting artistic research, social theory, and action. Our process of residing has indeed adopted also residencies as a tool. Les 18 has been sustaining the work of young and emerging artists from Morocco while hosting foreign ones, giving them time to navigate and relate to the city possibly otherwise. Our residencies have been very diverse in formats, length, and means, partly as we try to listen to artists' intentions and possibilities, while thinking with them the most meaningful way to be in the city. But such diversity has also resulted from different distributions of opportunities between diverse practitioners, as the politics of mobility and immobility as a result of the politics of mobility and immobility were embedded in. So this slide actually shows you the work of 4 Belgian artists, which each has come since 2018 for a 2-month residency, supported by a substantial grant offered by their government to promote Belgian artistic mobility. But if Western artists are often offered the infrastructure and right to come to the so-called global South, is there space for reciprocity in this supposed exchange? Who gets to come and who doesn't? Indeed, the careful work of these artists, their friendship, and in some cases their attempt to bring fellows met in Morocco to Belgium remarkably stem as manifestation of relational care and reciprocity. Tellingly though, our attempt to establish a counter-residency in partnership with another small organization, Air Antwerp, failed after just 1 year, partly as Belgian cultural fundings were selectively cut. So while 3 more Belgians could come after 2018, no Moroccan could leave. Experimental filmmaker, born Arab, female, and Muslim, wants to travel. This statement, part of a body of work developed by Lina Laraki as a result of Israel's refusal to give her a visa to go in residency in Palestine, speaks for itself. The politics of immobility, though, operates also for Morocco. For instance, in 8 years of existence, Les 18 had the economic endurance to run a residency program dedicated to North African artists only once. You may wonder why. Well, let me just tell you that if a European citizen only needs a valid passport to enter Morocco, a Mauritanian artist with a refugee status has a few more steps to take. In Rethinking Residencies, addressing how and who do we serve, the factor of time and the pressures of productive time is also consequential. Indeed, one of the specificities of Les 18 as a residency is its proximity to the Medina's cultures. Hence, many artists are compelled with the idea of working with the so-called local communities. Yet, when cultural distances and linguistic barriers are coupled by tight or production-driven working plans, the labor of care and mediation that as hosting bodies we indeed have to do becomes very challenging, and the outcomes at times problematic. So then how to facilitate cultural labor and investment in a place away from short-term logics and individualistic production goals? In order to share some concluding thoughts with you, allow me to briefly introduce one of the long-term projects of Les 18 called Kanat. Literally meaning channels, CANAT is a collective research platform focusing on the politics and poetics of water as a way to engage with and learn from the multiple manifestations of the commons in Morocco and beyond. The notion of commons used and the project in general draws from the material and symbolic legacies of the CANAT, the indigenous subterranean water harvesting system that grounded the foundation of Marrakesh as a once garden city. This millennial rhizomatic technology of water distribution locally grounded on principle of ecological solidarity and became the matrix to rethink how to relate to each other and our environments otherwise by interlacing the reactivation of collective memories of water cosmologies and political ecologies with the creation of spaces bringing closer desires and practices triggered by water as a way to make emerge shared future imaginaries. This learning process has developed through many shapes, such as artistic projects, gatherings, and action research proposals involving in a long-term fashion various groups of inhabitants through alliances with associations and actors in the city. A key lesson for CANAT as a collective making and contextually rooting project has been the importance of reiterating invitations and keep creating times and spaces for gathering, listening, and sharing with everyone involved. In Marrakesh, for instance, this led to the creation of a community edible garden run by the women of our neighbor, the Foundation d'Arbelage, as a result of 2 years exploring the legacies of Marrakesh as a garden city and the current lack of green spaces in the city. Reiterating invitation also to international artists led to the emergence of a curated network of people from different geographies, now part of what was once only a Le 18 project, and engaged in establishing conversations across localities. Throughout its life, Le 18 has tried to balance a working within, so for its direct communities, and a working throughout in international patterns of solidarities and exchange. As a small scale and, to be frank, financially struggling entity, this balance has at times been funders dependent, limiting our capacity to do as much for some as we were given the opportunity to do for others. Yet, notwithstanding the many failures punctuating our history, Le 18 has become what I titled at the beginning, drawing from Ursula Le Guin, a carrier bag, a place where other stories are told, constellations of friendships are born, and both ancestral and new seeds are gathered. If our bag is plentiful, yet it is also full of holes, and our lands are increasingly dry. So while we plead for rain, indeed we keep trying to endure and to ally. We keep holding responsibility for those that we host, for those that we mean to nourish, as they nourish us in our journey. Today, though, we have to call for those bigger than us, with more leverage than us, to share such responsibility, to stop telling the story of the big hero, and to help us knitting stronger carrier bags. Because as Le Guin puts it, still there are seeds to be gathered and room in the bag of stars. Thank you.
Thank you. So I first want to start, and I'm timing myself as well so that I don't go over the 10 minutes. So I want to say that this project started with the reception of a dream, a snippet of being in the space about 15 years ago. I walked out onto a porch. The street was full of homes that looked the same, and on the porches were indigenous people dancing in regalia. And so I didn't quite understand what the dream was, and it was important for me to remember. And so the project, a Tansic Center for Healing and Creative Leadership, is cited in a duplex that was slated for demolition in a historic neighborhood in Cleveland, Ohio. Currently, it's predominantly African-American, but at one point in its history, it was a community of the largest population of Hungarians to Hungary. And so if you know anything of the history of the development of Cleveland, that these neighborhoods were developed to bring over laborers to develop the suburban communities. And so Cleveland is a city that is symbiotic with the suburban areas. Part of this project for me is at the intersection of contemporary art, equity leadership, and healing. And so this project has really taught me what we mean by healing, not what I want it to be. And if we can go back to the first slide, that would be helpful to me. So I started out with telling you that this project started from a dream, but the catalyst to bring it from the unseen world into this world was the death of my grandfather. And my grandfather, his name was Paul Murphy. He was an industrial artist. He had a degree from Kent State that he got after the war. And so my early experience in developing a practice, because I think it's important that this is an artist-run space in a home, is that is where my practice began, was in my grandfather's home. He had a wood shop in the basement. He would give me scrap materials to make things with, tools to do that, and that would be how we spent our time together. The images that you are looking at on the left is a digital print on Kozo of the home before it was renovated. And it's currently a part of a series that was commissioned by the Cleveland Museum of Art in their current exhibition, Picturing Motherhood Now. And so it's a visual narrative of the birth of this project. And so you see my grandfather's hands, you see my grandmother's face, you see my nephew. All of these things were bounded in birth and death and lived experience that all became materials for the vision of this project. This conversation that we're having is really important in terms of space and time, because we're currently 1 year occupying the space after many challenges to get this work done. But when I think about this thing about rethinking residencies, it's really about rethinking relationships with artists, and in particular, artists of color. And so we currently use the term BIPOC, but for me, centering Black and Indigenous realities in a residency space that's sited in a historically Black neighborhood in Turtle Island in the Americas is an important, in an urban environment, it's an important kind of intersection of challenges and dilemmas to investigate and to invite artists to think about what their practice would be like, what kind of work they would make if their first relationships to making is a neighborhood, if their first audience are neighbors of children, of elders. Next slide, please. And so these are images of the space. This is, again, it's a duplex. So as you listen to me, I'm in Atoncic right now. I live on the second floor. So I am a neighbor to my neighbors, as well as a host and steward to the guests that we have here on site. And so this space is zoned for mixed use. And what's important about that is that in the creation of an alternative space for arts and culture and for change, we had to remove a 105-year-old anti-Semitic and racist law that would prevent this kind of work to happen in it. And so it actually had to, in creating something new, we had to heal something old. And so, people who come to our space, this is their home while they're here. And when there isn't an artist in residence, community members can use this space for workshops, book clubs, whatever. But it really is in response to our relationships that we make with others. I want to talk a little bit, and you can go to the next slide, around, for me, the intervention of a residency space for a Tanzik is threefold. One, attending to and caring for the cumulative impact of various forms of oppression within the art world. That part of the invitation is also creating a new experience for connecting with artists. So we have a resource library on site. We have a gallery on site, sited in a 2-car garage, and a place to live. So artists can live, work, and exhibit in this space so that the environment comes to them. They don't have to move anywhere. What's cool about the resource library as archive is that it is a gift of one person's library, John Carter, the founder and director of the Gestalt OSD Center. So we engage in using not just socially engaged theory and method, but applied behavioral science and equity thinking to support the artist's experimentation, their thinking, but also to support work being developed. One of the images, because Emily Jacir is here, is that we have a garden in our yard that is made up of all indigenous plants that is rooted in the Great Lakes region. And so you may see a small Palestinian flag in the yard that we put there after Dar Jacir's garden was burned. And, although there is a distance between our two spaces and places and relationships, it's an act of solidarity. And, the flag was tampered with. The screws of the flag were removed in some way, and it had to be repaired. To the right, the kitchen of the space was donated by the artist Michael Rakowitz from the exhibition A Color Removed. The kitchen was a part of some of work that he did around using his mother's foods, but also to cook the foods that were familiar to and loved by Tamir Rice. If you can change the slide, I only have, I think, 2 more minutes, and there's a couple more things I want to show you. That our first resident, artist in resident, was a Tuscarora artist, and her name is Jennifer Elizabeth Kreisberg. This residency experience gave her the space to not only create and write songs, but to bring her son with her. And so we developed not just a residency experience for Jennifer, but supported the work that her son wanted to do while he was with us. These are some images of some of the community programs that we've done. We partnered around birth, development of birth workers of color. Change the slide, please. And this was our first exhibition that happened in spring of this year. The artist Jose Rodriguez, we commissioned him to do an original work in response to the pandemic and to the racial reckoning. And he's an Afro-Cuban artist based in Okinawa and in Harlem. And this is the work that he created. I want to make a point that the gallery is called Agzo. It's the Mohawk word meaning grandma. And so he, designed this experience that really kind of shook me to my core, in that my grandmother, her occupation was an educator, so that the installation around classroom as detention really felt like the perfect inaugural experience. We have several residencies that we offer, but really most of our work is relationship based. And in terms of our, that we build relationships with others and we support what they want to investigate. And it really is an honor to be able to have a space that belongs to us, that the community invested in, and that whether or not we receive any funding ever again, it is sustainable in its size and scope, and that we're able to kind of offer and care for any artist. I also want to say that Cleveland, for me, is a site of experimentation. So this is really an invitation in this presentation and conversation to say to friends and colleagues that this is a place and space for you.
Thank you so much. First of all, I want to thank Rethinking Residencies for inviting me. It's a real honor to be here, and especially to talk with such highly accomplished colleagues. And already it's been really inspiring to hear the others speak. Rijks Academy, I have to say, is a very different scale from the last two presentations. And I'm going to give a short introduction. We have a 150-year history, but I've only been there for the last 3 years. So the Rijks Academy is a 2-year residency program focused on enabling artistic development. We have up to 50 artists in residency, in the main residency at one time, usually around 46 artists. And we also have shorter guest residencies in order to accommodate a wider range of opportunities and practices. We give financial support to all artists, regardless of their country of origin, which means that we can bring a very wide range of artists. Half of the community are Dutch or based in the Netherlands, and the other half come from all over the world. We select the artists with a jury through an open call, which is a very long process because we receive a large volume of applications. For example, this year, 1,700 artists applied for 23 places, and we're just in the middle of working on that. And we have a jury which rotates every year, and usually it's predominantly composed of artists. Each year we want to ensure that our community holds a wide range of practices and voices, and that reflect the urgencies and complexities of what's going on in the world around us, that pose important questions for today, and that create new languages and to be able to talk about this from a global perspective. We're particularly aware of the need to support underrepresented practices and practitioners and artists who are working in precarious conditions. Each artist receives a stipend, a place to live, a studio, and access to extensive making facilities and expertise, as well as dialogue with a wide range of artistic advisors from the Netherlands and from beyond. And we have our technical specialists work in a very collaborative way with artists when they're in residence. So if you click the slides, this is just to give us an example of the site, which is the really huge building on the right center. And the next one. This is the building, which was a military cavalry building that was converted in the early 90s. So our workshops range from metal, print, paint, plastics, ceramics, electronics, audiovisual, and also we're exploring digital technologies. And we'll click through a few slides just to give a sense of those. So yeah, next, that's metal, print, next, again, metal, next, paint and plastics and electronics and AV, next. It's an example of some of the digital experiments. So the emphasis is really on practice and experimentation and not on producing, and the artists can work between the workshops. So there's quite a kind of cross-disciplinary approach that a lot of artists develop when they're here. And I'll show a few images from our open studios, which is the point of the year where artists show their work. It's an annual exhibition. Each artist exhibits in their studios, and you can see the diversity of practices here. Like, for example, this is an animatronic suit by Meta Stera. If you go next. Again, Meta with a kind of animated environment. Next. So there's VR experiments. Similarly, this is next one. Molly Palmer working between sculpture and film installation and sound. Salim Bayeri working between also digital and kind of material technologies. Next. Razia Basati, who's working sort of between theatre and sculpture with animatronics as well. Next, Hand Samir, a painter, Egyptian. Next. Polina Medvedeva, who's working with film documentaries. And next one. This is Aldo Esparza Ramos, a Mexican artist who is working a lot with decolonial theory and set up a reading group and literally grounded the work by digging through our floor, or his floor in his studio, and held reading sessions here. And this is one example of a practice that was, grounding itself during the lockdown. And there were many other examples of this, and also of collaborative practices that developed between artists. So if you go to the next one, Toga, an Indonesian artist, was developing electronics and music and jamming, a jam station in his studio, which then extended to a lot of other artists getting involved. If you look at the next slide. This is an image of the jam sessions that started to become very regular and growing throughout the year. Next slide. An artist, Dong Hwan Kam, also actually before the Corona crisis, developed this kitchen in a communal area, underused communal area of the building. And that became an important kind of social space for other artists. Then recently we've set up a social practice workshop, and when Dong Hwan finished the residency, our social practice specialist, Elke, and him have been working with a local social center that supports asylum seekers and refugees to move the kitchen there and continue on developing different kinds of workshops and experiments in this new site. So the social practice is a workshop that we added this year and appointed Elke, who's an artist, Elke Uitenhuis, as a way to find, to support artists to venture out beyond the Rijksacademy into our local environment and to connect with a wider social sphere. And Elke is an artist who has a collaborative practice herself and has extensive relationships, and she's currently working on building kind of long-term sustainable relationships for the Rijksacademy and ways of linking artists when they come here so that they can also ground themselves where they are. If you go to the next slide, this is another example of worker collective who are in residence at the moment, who brought a library with them of publications relating to different kind of labor movements and the politics around labor. They also started growing plants in our garden that have dyes that they could make fabric dyes with, and then started collaborating on workshops with different groups who are also engaged in labor questions. And that was one that was also developed with the social practice workshop. And then the next slide. This one, Ratu Saraswati is an Indonesian resident who started looking a lot at what people were growing and the way in which flowers kind of resonated for her in the neighborhood, and started developing dialogues with local people, but also she started to look at one instance where she came across an anti-Muslim demonstration, which also had a lot of flowers on the ground, as you can see in the right-hand slide. And so she also worked to develop a way of kind of addressing that through a walk that she developed with our social practice specialist. So if you go to the next slide, one of the things while we've been kind of trying to work out how we extend our work in the locality, another important aspect of the Rijksacademy has been our global reach and the way in which the Rijksacademy is continually building an international community of artists. And an earlier initiative was the RAIN network, which is the Rijksacademy Artist Initiative Network, which is was one which was formed, which is now not as active, but initially was a model of looking at how artists that have been to the Rijksacademy go back to their places where they've come from and build new initiatives. So building on the relationality with the artists and creating an avenue to engage with other kinds of landscapes and expand to other localities and create a ripple effect. And so a couple of examples of that are, for example, Kinarch Studio in Kinshasa is an important base for artists. And this year we brought an artist, Francis Tendelomba, came to residence, who knew about the Rijksacademy through Kinarch Studio. Also, Ruang Grupa was co-founded by Ade Damoan, a Rijksacademy alumnus, who went back and set up, co-founded Ruang Grupa, and then Good School, which is an artistic development program in Jakarta. And now they're also working on the artistic coordination of Documenta. So one of the things that, going forwards has been the importance of keeping a connection with alumni and supporting artists more widely internationally. And if you go to the next slide, Arts Collaboratory is an initiative that also was formed from the template of RAIN and is an initiative that we're continuing to collaborate with. So quickly to sum up, the Rijksacademy is a creative environment that's consistently evolving in relation to its community, to the needs of artists, and growing with and responding to the people and practices that we support, as well as to the wider field and social context. We're supporting many artists who are trying to make sense of the world in different ways through their practices and who are coming from very diverse geopolitical contexts, which creates a complex community. We strive to create the conditions in which all artists feel at home and comfortable to be themselves and to open up and deepen their practices in ways that are true to themselves and to develop on an artistic level as well as on a human level. So this involves constant attention, dialogue, listening, and critical reflection, and creating the culture and space for artists to speak up when they need to. This happens with artists individually and collectively, and involves balancing the needs of the individual and the whole community. So it's a delicate balance to find, and involves sensitivity, investment, and commitment from all of our team and from the community as a whole itself. So our investment is in time and space for artists as well as for dialogue. And we see that this is both an institutional responsibility, but it also happens itself between artists, and that many new initiatives are generated through this and feedback and influence our path forwards. In this way, being open to and stimulating the community to be part of inventing the structures that they and other artists need for the future is very much a part of our consciousness and way forwards. I rushed through a bit the end of it, but I'll finish there.
Hello, good evening. First, I just want to thank Rethinking Residencies as well as the Verilis Center for hosting this, and Carrie for inviting me. It's really great to be here, especially with all the other panelists. And then before I start, Carmen, that was so beautiful. And I can't believe I'm hearing about that for the first time on this panel. Thank you. I was so touched by that story. It represents so much for me. And I'm going to come to that garden. I promise you. So, Dar Jacir was founded in 2014. And when we founded it, we envisioned that it would be a learning hub for the Bethlehem community and beyond, a place to ask questions, exchange ideas, to fail. Failure was a very important concept for us because we felt that there weren't spaces for artists to gather together in a pedagogical way and really make mistakes, talk about failure amongst each other. And we do see ourselves as a grassroots center dedicated to the local community. Another one of the points that was important to our vision was that it would be an address, the house would become an address for the Bethlehemite community in Colombia and Chile, in which there's more than 500,000 Palestinians living from the Bethlehem area. That's linked to the history in Bethlehem, but also linked to the archive that we also have in the house. And then the third thing that was really important to us was protecting the green space around the house and teaching children on our street about planting and the importance of the environment, indigenous plants, and things like this. Oh, can you change the slide, please? So the house, the photo that you see on the left is coming from our archive. It was built in the late 1880s by my great-great-grandfather, and it lies on the historic Jerusalem-Hebron Road. And then the house on, the photograph on the right is a wedding from 1911. The house has witnessed and endured wars, occupations, and revolutions, and has stood strong through the Ottoman Empire, the British Mandate, and currently the Israeli occupation. It's really important to us, and it was really nice to hear Francesca and Carmen talking about their residencies being in a home, because that's something, the architecture of the space in which we host our residency, the fact that it's in a home, also means that we are intimate and we are small, and we don't try to be something bigger than that. That's exactly where the beauty of our project and the main goal of our project lies, in that in and of itself. You know, particularly in our context in Palestine, where, you know, these neoliberal structures which have been imposed post-Oslo, in which everybody is invested in building new buildings, incessantly building new fancy buildings with all the latest infrastructure. I don't actually know why anyone is actually building anything in Palestine at this point. So the project for us is multifaceted and mainly devoted to educational, cultural, research, and agricultural activities in collaboration with local communities, people, and also other centers in the Bethlehem area, and then from there outwards to the rest of Palestine and beyond. At its core, it's an experimental pedagogical hub. And we can change the slide. It also hosts an archive which contains rare records, which includes photographs. Oh, actually, this is the wrong slide. Yeah, there. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Which includes photographs. The peak period, I think this is important because we talk so much about movement, and I think it's important to point to that the peak period of globalization was actually at the turn of the 20th century for Bethlehem, when Ottoman era merchants from Bethlehem were moving around from month to month in and around Latin America, East Asia, and as well as other parts of the Ottoman Empire. The archive that we have includes diaries, photographs, ephemera, newspapers, personal letters exchanged between Bethlehem and those various points in the globe, dating from the 1880s to around the 1930s, as well as ledgers and correspondence. So it really is an important element and spans a period of 50 years. The reason they're so precious and rare is because they talk about a time when the city was a very fluid, cosmopolitan, and actually international center. And I think that it's really important to preserve this collection and ensure that it's safe for future generations. We can change to the next slide. Beginning in the 1850s, traders began breaking away from the traditional method of selling devotional objects in Bethlehem, obviously, through the Franciscan order, who would then send the products to Jerusalem, where they would later be shipped from Akka. Instead, they started setting their eyes on these newly accessible global markets that were accessible with the advent of steam travel, railways, improved technologies of communication, etc. So I think that history of the geographical fluidity of the Ottoman Empire, long before the creation of the Israeli state and its subsequent military occupation. Actually, can we go back a slide, please? Sorry, no, back. I'm used to managing this myself, so it's kind of weird to have somebody else doing it. Yeah, so now we can go forward. Yeah, thank you. back one. Thank you. So Bethlehem is connected to Jerusalem. It's about 7 kilometers from our gate to the center of Jerusalem. And as I said before, it lies on the historic Jerusalem-Hebron road. And it's also obviously a road of it's a historic pilgrimage road, obviously. So when we talk about the steady decline of Palestine's connection to the rest of the world, it can be traced back to British rule from the mid-1920s, when the British Mandate authorities, like other European colonial states, introduced restrictive citizenship laws and sought to monitor and control the indigenous population and their movements. So, for example, in the 1920s, over 9,000 Bethlehemites alone applied for citizenship to be able to return to their homes in Bethlehem. And the British authorities only allowed 100 people to return. These are Bethlehemites who were in Chile and Colombia as temporary moves, not ever to stay there. And so the process just becomes more and more pronounced as you move through the War of 1948. And obviously this division of historic Palestine turns into what is now Israel, and then West Bank and Gaza. And then obviously the Oslo Accords of 93 further divides Palestine into the small areas of Area A, Area B, Area C. The culmination of a historic process of Palestine's physical disappearance and subsequent restrictions of movement to its population. So now we can go to the next slide. So for the purposes of this discussion, it is important to situate where we are, both temporally and spatially, because we are living currently under a colonial apartheid. The previous slide before this showed the way our road was before. This is what it looks like right now. We are 200 meters from this watchtower, which was placed in the middle of our neighborhood, in the middle of our street, in the middle of Bethlehem, cutting us off from each other and our neighbors. Bethlehem today is surrounded by 21 settlements. They have completely encircled us and have confiscated Bethlehem's agricultural land. People can no longer reach their agricultural land. So besides the checkpoints that separate people and community from each other, Bethlehemites cannot reach Jerusalem. There's also the settler roads, which function as another way of controlling people and encircling the city. We can go to the next slide. We are also the most tear-gassed place in the world, and our center is regularly doused in skunk. And regularly, the street is regularly witness to incursions, some Israeli incursions, sometimes daily for weeks. Next slide. These are tear gas canisters collected from the garden. So for the purposes of this discussion, I thought it would be nice, we can go to the next slide. And again, overlapping with Carmen here, talking about Michael Rakowitz. I was really struck by what she said about it's a response to our relationship with others. And I really feel that the project in Bethlehem is very much built on networks and relationships. Michael is someone who I've been working with and who's a dear friend of mine, who's been coming to Palestine for the last 20 years. And he gave our very first workshop in Bethlehem in 2018. And I bring it up here because I do feel like that workshop, along with Vivian Sansour, who I'll talk about next, really set a foundation for what we are trying to do at the center. So the focus of his workshop was conceived especially with the launch of the Dar Jacir workshop and seminar programs. And at that time, we can go to the next slide. At that time, I invited Michael to come, and then we were in the middle, well, at the end of renovation, but the people renovating our home had locked us out and would not let anyone enter the premises. So we said, okay, what are we going to do? And I suggested that we host the workshop on our street at our neighbors. And every day we held the workshop at a different neighbor's place, in order first to introduce what we were doing to the workshop, but also to talk about these ideas of hosting and neighbors. We can go to the next slide. So we, on our street, we have hotels, we have a camp across the street, we have, a bar, we have all kinds of different things on the street. So we spent each day in a different site. And when we were in Azza camp, which is across the street, some of the elders of the camp came to where we were gathering, and they said, "Where is Bint Jacir? Where is Bint Jacir?" That would be me, obviously. And I said, "I'm here." And they said, "We are so happy you're doing this. We are so honored that your house is going to become the center. We have only been your neighbors for 70 years. That simple line and the immensity of that and what that means and the weight and the history of that line is so profoundly touching, and it's like the perfect line that if we were able to tell our own history rather than others telling history about us, that's how we talk and that's what we would say. So we can go to the next line, the next slide, not line. So in reciprocation, the workshop concluded where because we weren't allowed in the house by the people renovating, we cooked outside in the garden, and all of the neighbors were invited to the feast, which featured barbecued kanafa and Iraqi maskouf that Michael made. Everyone participated in preparing and consuming the meal, and it was a social and celebratory act of hosting in the shadow of a hostile occupying force. Next slide. I'm just checking the time. I don't want to make sure I don't go over. Vivian Sansour, who is an artist living and working in Bethlehem, was also shortly after Michael came in and was our very first resident. And her project was called The Living Seed Library and the Duality of Stones. And I just like to read from her text that she wrote. Stemming from the belief that architectural conservation cannot be complete without the botanical revival and preservation of the crops and plants that our ancestors developed, cultivated, and propagated for our survival, I propose to apply my work in seed conservation in the landscape residency, where I would create a demonstration site of heirloom varieties. Since we will be starting in the summer, I would like to plant the plot with mulukhiyya and heirloom Peruvian zinnias that I have been propagating for the last 2 years that have been adapted very well to this microclimate. The mulukhiyya will be homage to a well-loved dish in Palestine that carries with it several stories of method, life events, and seasonal gatherings. The zinnias, which were originally passed down to me by my lifetime mentor, John Sabella, are an homage to those who came before us and gave us the seed and knowledge that has allowed us to survive for millennia. A garden of biodiverse natural art will be erected and will be summoned by a harvesting event in September. We can go to the next slide.
Emily J., we actually have to start moving to the conversation.
Oh my God, I told you I would do this. Have I really been talking for 10 minutes?
I guess so, but I've been so entranced I wasn't checking either. But I do want to properly wrap you though. So if you have like a final statement, then we can move on to the conversations. I do want to be respectful.
You know what? I could just keep talking. So maybe we'll go through Vivian's slides and maybe I'll talk about stuff during the conversation. Because I had 7 minutes. I was timing it too, but I could be off.
No problem.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me.
No, we're all good. Well, I just want to say thank you to all of our panelists. And this is going to be an interactive conversation. So I need everybody that's in this room, all 227 of you all, to clap it up for our panelists and for the work that they're doing in their respective cities. Clap it up, clap it up, clap it up. And we had a comment in the chat saying, can we hear about art and not politics? But unfortunately, if you are an artist and you ain't talking about politics, you ain't no artist, right? That's the really bastardized version of the Nina Simone quote. And so the name of this panel is Representation, Accountability, and Solidarity in Institutions and the Artists We Serve. And so it's very important that we ground this conversation in place and the ills and politics of that place. So we can't have one without the other. So just wanted to put that in. I don't even know where to start because there are so many things that you all brought up in this conversation today. But I think I'll start with place. What role does location of your organization play in addressing not just the local and global issues, but also in the selection process of your residents? And anybody can jump in. You know, we're doing this family style, so.
For me personally, I've never selected a resident. I think the ecosystem of the project calls to it the artists that need to be in relationship with the place and space. So for example, an upcoming artist in residence is Bianca Monet, who's a sound artist. And they're going to be investigating disinvestment in African-American homes and the impact of kind of Black fugitivity and migration after losing, and thinking about what it means for the impact on our communities when Black people lose their homes. And this residency exists because we acquired a home that was lost to an African-American family. So it feels important. We have a sound lab on site for their practice as well as a wood shop. So for me, I don't make that decision, but I do need to respond to the needs that the environment is asking me to steward.
Thank you, Carmen. Anyone else want to jump in? All right. And so what makes for a productive and successful residency in a climate such as this? And is it even the responsibility of the arts and culture community to speak to and be critical of the political climate for which your organization lives?
I'm going to collapse both of those questions that you just asked, because in our case, it's really essential that the spaces artists run and artists make decisions and artists develop programs and seminars, and that we trust artists, which is something that is really lacking where we are, especially given the EU funding which comes into the West Bank. The trusting artists is something that does not go hand in hand with that kind of funding. And also it requires a methodology of working that we actively kind of work against in a way, because we really think and talk together about what we're doing. And we also, like, I actually did, unlike Carmen, I did curate, and I'm curating a residency program, but that's in tandem with other artists that are like Nicholas Jad is now curating. He has a sound program. My sister Anne Marie curates a cinema program, and these things feed in and out of each other. So yeah, it's essential.
Anyone else? Let's not be shy, y'all. We gotta give the people a show and to show our expertise here.
I mean, I can say something in terms of the first question. Well, first, something that I didn't mention before is that Ladies Week is actually a team of today 6 different people. So different programs are also sort of run and led by different different members of the team. So I cannot entirely answer for all questions for everyone. In our case, every single conversation and project run with different artists has often been through an encounter that didn't necessarily that wasn't necessarily based on where the person was coming from. Having said that, something that I tried to highlight in my presentation is that we have to be, and we have trying to be extremely careful in balancing choices, because the politics of funding offer way more opportunities to certain people and not to others. So that's something that it's inevitable in a way to be trying to counterbalance with whatever little, as a parenthesis, means we have to do that.
Yeah, and that actually makes me think about, I want to throw this to Emily P. You're in leadership of an organization that's 150 years old, right? And so to Francesca's point, how do you balance, right, the historical legacy of this organization with contemporary issues, especially in terms of funding, right? Or especially in terms of the prestige of your organization? How do you balance that as a leader?
It's a good question, actually. I mean, it's changed. It's had many different eras in that 150 years. But certainly a question for me, coming also from a much smaller organization beforehand, and entering into something that's very well established and has a huge international reputation and value in the Netherlands is, how do we... I mean, I think the Rijksacademy has a very sort of heavy institutional structure in a way. At the same time, it gives a lot of space to artists. And I think that question of trust or the point about trust is a really nice one, that I think when artists come in, there's a lot of space for them to create their kind of path, and a lot of... there isn't a lot of, we try to, allow artists to follow their practices in different ways. And I was trying to show a bit in the presentation how that creates different ways in which artists kind of allow their practice to travel out of the studio and into the, communal environment and into the building in different ways. But also one of the things when you talk about place is that I was very conscious of was that this was a sort of compound that was not connecting to where it was. And when you have a lot of artists coming from abroad who don't understand, some of them have never been to the Netherlands, some of them have never been to Europe. Like, how do you, try to work in a bit more of a grounded and connected place to where we are and what the issues are at stake in terms of our locality, because it's easy to see Amsterdam as, within a certain lens of a, certain image of the city, but actually there's a lot that's happening and issues at stake within our immediate neighborhood that gives an opportunity in a way for some kind of meeting point between a specific local context and artists coming and bringing with them a lot of things that they want to share about where they come from. But I think I did not really answer the question. But
No, that was great because it actually led to something I was thinking about in terms of Carmen's organization, right? As you talked about, there's this kind of idea or branding around Amsterdam, right? Where people don't think there are certain social ills. And Shaker is one of those places in the US, because I remember, one of my best friends is from Shaker Heights, Cleveland, and she used to always talk about how the branding of that city was, it's like this like bastion of like racial harmony and like all the things. And so wanting to ask Carmen, through your residencies, how do you push against that particular branding of that area?
Well, just to be clear, this project is in the Buckeye Shaker neighborhood, so it it locates itself at the intersection of Cleveland and Shaker Heights. And so really the interest for me was the cross section of class. So I lived 4 blocks east before I moved into this space. And so I have the same internet, the same service, the same plan, but the access to the stability of said internet has shifted by 4 blocks. So for me, Cleveland is a city of redlining, of borders and boundaries. The Arabs live on the west side, the Jews live on the east side, lesbians live on the east side, gay men live on the west side. So the experiment in this project has also been to invite people to come to this in-between place and experience who they are in that space. And so for me, the fundamental kind of core in this project is that everyone has a practice, but everyone does not get the same invitation to nurture it and receive feedback in their practice. And so whether it's someone who is self-taught as an artist or someone whose work also serves a more functional purpose in the world, for me, those are the kinds of people whose practice interests me in supporting them being here. And also removing the veil for people in the neighborhood who get to meet the artist, learn about who they are as a human being, see them develop a concept, and then see that concept exhibited and installed. And all of those processes are transparent. And so for me, I'm not waiting to be included or invited to the table, but simply saying that the relationships that artists have with each other are more valuable than the institutions that often, create the space for us to meet one another. So for example, the artist Sandra Perry has helped in designing the digital lab that we have on site. And I want a young person to know who Sandra is before they see her work in the museum. I want them to know her as a human being, that the object that we make isn't more significant than the maker, that there is an interrelationship in the materiality of a lived life and what we produce as artists.
Thank you for that. And so, for us in the US, a lot of the things that have happened after summer 2020, people refer to as the post-George Floyd effect. And so I'm wondering, for all of your organizations, how are you working to not be reactionary and not do work that is in response to, but getting ahead of things that are currently happening? Because as we see, the art world has been shaking, y'all, since this has all happened, and a lot of changes have been made that could have been previously made. And so how are you working to not be reactionary in terms of the politics that are surrounding our climate right now? Are we stumped? Should I rephrase? So I'll rephrase it this way. In terms of the artists that you're bringing into the residencies, how are you being mindful to select artists that are talking about relevant issues that are evergreen and not necessarily like we have to talk about white supremacy now because that's the new rage? Like, how are you selecting based on without having to check boxes? I'll say it that way. If you're doing it at all, you can all say like, we're so beyond that. We don't do that. We don't move that way. But it's something that I've been thinking about a lot. So I had to ask you brilliant people today.
I mean, I could say, because we have an open call, so and a jury, so there's a lot of, like I said, weeks of looking at applications and discussing. And I think we're in a luxurious position that we have such a wide range of applicants that you can really build a community that has a kind of multiplicity of voices and positions and practices that I think does create a more complex and nuanced conversation within the community, because there's so much difference embedded within it. So I think that also, I think the importance for us is of listening to our community and also creating the space for people to speak both, as I said, on an individual basis and collectively. And I think that means that it's an ongoing conversation. It's always evolving and listening and trying to respond to what's needed.
And I think for me, Emily, you know, I think it's a different kind of question when you have kind of historically been a kind of a monocultural institution rather than a project that's kind of rooted in kind of complexity in its development and growth. And so for me, when I think about Dar Jacir or Atansik, you know, these aren't necessarily questions we have to wrestle with. But I think these are projects that show rather than tell or explain. And for me, there are times where that's an invitation for a larger institution to partner with us. You know, I think there's something in you know, and Emily brought it up, artist-led space, that is the framework and the container and ecosystem in its development and in what gives it sustenance. So, one of the kind of residencies that we've developed and no one has said yes to taking it on is that we are offering a residency to a larger institution to be in a cohort-based experience to develop their equity competency, in which Atansik would be the site for a project, both an exhibition and a public program that would be a capstone project for that kind of organizational residency program, so that institution comes to us to experiment.
I think it's a good point about partnering up, and actually, Francesca, you mentioned it in your presentation that you need like bigger structures to support, and actually, well, it is one of the things we do is collaborate a lot with other partners. But anyway, I was kind of curious when you mentioned that to think into it. Like how, in a way, that's why I showed this network of smaller initiatives that the Rijksacademy was supporting. And one of the questions for me now is, how do we benefit the ecosystem more broadly?
Thank you. I have 51 more questions to ask you all, but the people are speaking. So I'm going to move on to the Q&A. Our first question is coming from Elisa, and the question is as follows. The importance of a sense of home has been coming up a lot across different presentations. What do you feel makes for good hospitality, i.e. welcoming organizational practices in your experience? And that's for anyone.
I think that the answer to that question will shift depending on who is coming, who you've invited, who you're hosting, why you're hosting them, and the conversation that you would have with that person, whether they are living on your street or coming from far away. And through that conversation, already that intimacy and that welcoming starts. I mean, we feel that we work in a really bespoke way, in a really small, intimate, bespoke way, so that each artist that comes, it's coming from also like they design their own residency. We don't impose anything on them. Some want to just work with young artists. Some want to, everyone does something different. So I think it starts even before they come. I think that's the most important thing. And it comes from conversation. And then, yes, welcoming them. I don't know. I have the basic welcoming people in your home thing, which actually I realized much later that a lot of people, it's not to be taken for granted, the things that we do to care for other people. So, yeah.
I'm actually going to jump back to one of my questions. She brought something up that I thought about in terms of welcoming artists, right? How are we thinking about welcoming surrounding communities as well, especially because for some of you all, gentrification is really serious to the area in which your organization exists. And so how are you through these residencies building relationships with the current communities? And as the community changes, how are you also navigating that relationship? And being welcoming neighbors, right? Like Carmen talked about. And also Emily J as well.
well, for me, I'm lucky because with my project, the Block Club president lives across the street. And so from kind of soup to nuts with this project, we've become friends, and she gives me feedback, like, Carmen, it's time to cut the grass, like it's getting high, that kind of thing, or giving me feedback on the workers who were on site during the renovation, and having a point person to let me know if they're being neighborly in their work ethic and things like that. But in order to get the variance to even, change the zoning of the project, I had to get the permission from my neighbors. And so of the 23 families that live on the street, 21 people signed the letter of support. And so for me, it was also feedback on that communities want artists to be their neighbors, not art projects coming to their neighborhood. And so particularly in urban areas where arts and culture is often the kind of the flag of change in terms of gentrification. This project for me was around place, I call it place reclamation and excavation. So making public who has lived in this space before us, who has owned this building before us, and really inviting the stories from the neighbors, because the neighbor next door has lived on this street for 30 years. So, but I also want to say something about time. For me, 30 years doesn't mean anything. For me, 10 years doesn't mean anything. My family has lived in Northeast Ohio for over 2 centuries. And so for me, this story of home and place and structure and movement is an ongoing story of my family's displacement from North Carolina and from Canada into Northeast Ohio. So for me, this story has not completed itself, and it's an invitation to ask of my neighbors, what is their story of place?
I love that. We're actually coming down to time. So I just wanted to know from each of you, if possible, how you foresee the future of your programs in terms of responding to both artist needs and the political climate.
That's a very difficult question.
I had to hit y'all heavy as we wrap.
Well, I mean, I'll try to give one answer. Well, actually, something we're currently facing is one of those moments of exhaustion to a certain extent, like extreme tiredness and greater financial precarity than probably any time before. And so we're trying to take it as an opportunity, actually, to really sort of get back to what Ladies With has been in the past and what it is today and what it could become in the future. Emily, you were talking about failures, kind of look into our own failures, but in a constructive way. And actually over the next few months, also because we've had the chance to be invited as part of the upcoming Documenta 15. That's going to be part of the process we're going to go through, trying to really take the time to look into our own model, if a model exists, and inviting as many people that have been nourishing Ladies With to take part in that process of thinking and rethinking what we are and what we could be and become, very loosely, and a lot more, because we try to not be proactive and hyper productive, but it's sometimes it's very hard to contain ourselves.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Shall I go? Well, I have to say we're looking at all the new applications at the moment, and I have to say I feel really excited about what's happening in art around the world. I feel really, I don't know, you start to see a lot of shifts taking place when you have this kind of global perspective of so many artists applying, and a lot of really amazing work coming out of parts of the global south, for example. So I mean, one of the things that I really want to work on is, in a way, what better structures can we invent to support artists more, and questions about sustainability and precarity of artists, like how can we, build more sustainable structures? Because I'm also concerned not only for you see what the before and the during and the after with the Rijksacademy. We stay in touch with all our alumni, and I'm kind of interested to think about, how do we also support artists beyond the program? And I think one of the things that we're also working on again is how we open up and share more, so that we give wider access to what we do. So there are lots of different projects in development, let's say, but generally I'm optimistic.
Emily J, Carmen.
You know, in our case, we really took in the summer of 2019 a step back to reevaluate everything that we had been doing and to restructure and rethink and plan. So we're kind of still in that process. So we are, I mean, I really consider what we're doing in a kind of very experimental way that unfolds through the process. So I don't see some kind of major shift happening. Despite the current political circumstances. For example, with COVID, we, in March of 2020, COVID hit us, but we are in a situation where we were already in crisis and already families were separated and people can't travel. So it was just another thing. And we very quickly, we met on March 17th, and by March 20th, we had an online program up and running. Zoom is something that, especially in Palestine, we've been using for years because we are a community that is not allowed to gather. So we have constantly had to find and circumvent all of these ways of trying to block us from each other. So for us, Zoom was just a natural, okay, this has happened. Okay, now how are we going to do this? So for us, that's what we're doing. We're just go forward.
For me, I don't want this project to be reactive. I think part of the awareness, for me as an artist, is the cumulative impact of these conditions. So there is no urgency, but there is an investment in what is the intervention required to anticipate certain dynamics in our world. This project is intentionally small, and people kept asking, why do you want a small space? And now people can't gather in large spaces, so it feels, not that we predicted a pandemic, but I think we're aware of that this project of settler colonialism is not going away anytime soon. And in the ways in which things are shifting, there will be resistance. And so we're here to support both the awareness and the resistance. And I also want people to connect and build relationships with this project. There's more people to get to know. And I don't mean invite to do things, but to really invite relationship, whether it's with individual artists or other communities, to continue to get to know our neighbors. And for other projects, I would, Emily talked about wanting to come see the garden, but, I would love an exchange between both spaces. There's another artist, Jeremy Dennis, who has a project for BIPOC artists in his grandmother's home called Ma's House. So I think, there's different ways that I think the art world is reconfiguring how we interact with each other. And I invite more of it. I'm excited about that.
Well, I hope that our conversation today will kind of instigate that type of relationship building, not just amongst us arts workers, but everyone that's on this call, extending out to all of our networks. I want to thank you all so much. We could have honestly kept talking for 3 hours, but I think the gems that y'all dropped today, I'm like over here taking notes, giving me a lot of things to think about in my own work. And so I really appreciate you all. Thank you everyone that sat and listened and shared in the comments. We hope you continue to join us, the Rethinking Residencies fam. We have an event at 5, and then we have more programming tomorrow. So make sure you tap in with us. And if your organization isn't a part, holler at Carrie or how you can be down. And with that, again, I'm Stephanye Watts representing Recess Art, and I'm passing the mic back to Carrie. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, Emily, Pethick, Emily, Jacir, Carmen, and Francesca. That was great. I was going to try and wrap it up a little bit, but I don't think I can because you all have completely different contexts and programs and, but I think coming together and talking about what you're doing and the underlining element of that is artists, of course, and trusting artists, which I thought was a really great through line throughout all of your presentations and discussions, and the way that artists really shape residencies and how the relationships that we build with the artists are the foundation for that. So we're going to wrap up today's symposium. In a moment, we will watch a video on curatorial residencies by Susan Hapgood, Executive Director of the International Studio and Curatorial Program. And I think throughout the symposium, we've spoken mostly of artist residencies, but I think it's important to remember that many of our programs support curators, and there's a real absence of curatorial residencies and funding for those. But Susan will talk more about that in the video. And as Stephanie mentioned, we're back tomorrow in Zoom space, same link at 2 p.m. And then we have a second panel at 5 p.m. Thank you for joining us. Stick around. Susan's video will cue now. And then after that, we'll just have a Rethinking Residency slide presentation that you can watch for a few minutes before you sign off if you like.
Hi, I'm Susan Hapgood. I'm the Executive Director of the International Studio and Curatorial Program based in New York City. As we are hearing throughout the symposium, artist residencies are an extremely prevalent form of residency. There are also curatorial residencies. They are far fewer. As a former curator myself, and now as director at ISCP, I have the privilege of overseeing some curatorial residents, and it is an extremely fruitful area of what we do. So I'm happy to share my insights a little bit and some of the research of my colleague Carrie Conti as well. So ISCP was founded in 1994 as the International Studio Program, and then in 1999, a curator from the Czech Republic came and participated, and we added C to the name. So it became International Studio and Curatorial Program. And we are one of the fewest curatorial programs, residency programs in the world. So what is a curatorial residency? It is obviously concentrated time to work on one's research, to work on one's projects, maybe even to produce a project or an exhibition if there is funding that comes with the residency for that project. Also the chance to do immersive studio visits, and at ISCP, one is surrounded by about 95% of the program is artists and about 5% is residents. So curators can always have studio visits, and really, I as a former curator, what could be better than to be surrounded by artists? It's also a very educational residency. There's a lot to learn about other people's practices. Also, the change of location creates a situation where you step outside of your comfort zone. You are able to step away from your normal responsibilities, your day-to-day routine responsibilities. And obviously, curators want to disseminate their own ideas. about their projects, about the art they're working with, and the artists they're working, the art they're working on, and the artists they're working with. Artists are very, very happy to be in residence with curators as well. Curators are definitely among the most important cultural leaders we have. They are, they serve the communities that they're part of, the institutions that they're working with, and they are really the connectors in the arts ecosystem. They, in the words of Kitty Scott, create a richer ecosystem, and at ISCP they definitely do that.